Now, for more on this story, we can bring in Rod Thornton, Senior Lecturer at the Defence Studies Department at King's College London. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining us here on France 24 tonight. Why would Russia be trying to recruit Cubans to fight over in Ukraine?
Well, we know two things about the Russian operation in Ukraine. They are short of artillery shells, and that's why Putin is having to kind of go to the North Koreans for ammunition. And they're also short of human kind of soldiery, personnel. They need to recruit lots of, in essence, foreigners, because what Putin doesn't want is to have lots of casualties amongst the ethnic Russian population, his own population. He will make himself very unpopular if lots of conscripts are killed. This is why conscripts don't fight in Ukraine, but also the professional Russian soldiery. He doesn't want high casualty numbers amongst them as well, because it's deeply unpopular amongst his own population. Therefore, he goes abroad to find extra personnel. He's been to Syria to get troops for his army in Syria. He's been to Iraq. An Iraqi was killed on the Ukraine front line recently. And Serbia as well has provided soldiers for the Russian army. So he's going to countries, in this case, Cuba, to find extra soldiery.
But it seems he went to Cuba behind the Cubans' back. This is why they're trying to break up this trafficking network.
Yes, they call it human trafficking, but we kind of need to be careful. These Cubans are being paid quite a bit of money. The latest contracts we've seen offer them $2,000 signing on fee and $2,000 a month. So for an ordinary Cuban peasant, this is big money. So the Russians, coercion, it's a bit murky about what is really happening. Are they being coerced, or are they being encouraged by the salaries on offer, according to the latest reports from Russia? So it's difficult to ascertain exactly what is happening here.
And Cubans aren't the only mercenaries Russia has tried to recruit, because I read early on in the war that they were getting fighters from Afghanistan who were trained by NATO.
Yeah. They're looking at anywhere they can, anywhere where there are lots of poor people, basically, people living on the breadline who need jobs. So if you're encouraged to go and fight in Ukraine for what appears to be quite a lot of money, then you might be encouraged to do so. But we know from what's happened with the prisoners that Putin or Wagner forces used. They were basically cannon fodder, just sent on human wave assaults against Ukraine and taking massive casualties. So you can see these kind of foreign soldiers being used as basically as cannon fodder. And it definitely should not be looked upon very badly by the rest of the world.
Could this risk escalating the conflict? Because what we've seen since the war in Ukraine broke out is Russia developed a sort of axis with countries like Iran, North Korea. We supposedly have an upcoming meeting between Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un. Could potentially we see foreign fighters knowingly come to Russia's aid?
They won't be in massive numbers. There'll be a few hundred, maybe a couple of thousand, but it won't be. We're not talking massive numbers here. When we talk about human trafficking, we're only talking about 100 or so, 122 Cubans apparently in the Russian military. So we're not talking huge numbers. Yes, it should be. We have to be careful about, but we should look upon it as a positive, because it shows a sign of desperation of the Russian military and of the Putin regime to try and get soldiers to do the fighting. It doesn't look good for the Russians.
And what about the fact that they would have to go and turn to North Korea to supply weapons? That too is an act of desperation?
It's an act of desperation, but you can see why they're doing it. Very few countries around the world have the kind of artillery shells that fit kind of Russian caliber artillery. So the North Koreans will have 122 millimeter artillery shells and 152 millimeter artillery shells, which the Russians are desperately running short of. They're apparently firing huge numbers of artillery shells per day, and their own factories cannot produce the number of artillery shells to replenish what's being used up every day. Therefore, the desperation is setting in. Yes, North Korea has literally millions of these types of artillery shells. And one of the dangers for the Russian military is these are often very old shells that have been in storage by the North Koreans for a long time, and they could be very dangerous to use these days if the Russian military does have to use North Korean artillery shells.
We'll see how this pans out. We're going to have to leave it there, Rod Thornton. Thank you very much for joining us on the program tonight.
Thank you very much.